I am Patrick Yoes, National President of Fraternal Order Police. This is the Blue View. Well, Representative Stauber, thank you for joining us on the Blue View podcast. Hey, you've got a really interesting history. Professional hockey, law enforcement officer, 26 years, correct?
23, yeah.
23 years at Duluth, vice president of your FOP Lodge. You got an interesting life. Now that I've told everybody about you, how about you go a little bit further and let our listeners and viewers know a little bit more about you?
Thanks, Pat. It's great to be with you, and I appreciate all the work you do. And as we spoke off camera, we believe it's Police Week, 52 weeks a year, and I appreciate that. So it's great to be with you all. I'm Pete Stauber, member of Congress for Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, Northeast Minnesota. Real briefly, I had a professional hockey career many, many years ago with the Detroit Red Wings, and once I retired due to an injury, I became a law enforcement officer in the city of Cottage Grove, Minnesota. I was a police officer, paramedic. Then I went to my hometown in Duluth, Minnesota. It's right on the western tip of Lake Superior, and spent 23 years there. I began as a patrol officer, ended as an area commander, and I founded my union and I ended up being president of my union. And I know that I left the Duluth Police Department better than when I came because of that. The men and women that followed me are enjoying the benefits of our hard work, and I'm very happy and proud that we did that. People have said we should have done it a long time ago, but I retired, and during my police career, prior to retiring, I also served as a city councilor in my hometown of Hermantown, Minnesota, and also a St. Louis County commissioner for St. Louis County, which is a huge county. And in the meantime, married, 6 kids. My wife spent just under 25 years in the military. She's an Iraq War veteran. So both, we tell our kids, Mom and Dad wore uniforms for a living. We were public servants, and we're proud of that. And I think, Pat, that's why I'm just so passionate about police work, because I'm just one of a few in Congress that have ever worn the uniform. Yeah. I'm just one of a few in Congress that have had violence put forth against me. I was off duty. I was shot in the head in December of 1995 by a career criminal, and survived that. And while on duty, by the grace of God, a criminal suspect's gun malfunctioned. He had it to my head. He got the jump on me, as we say, and I'm just fortunate to be here. It's like I got a second chance, right? And I want to kick the can of life. And in the meantime, Pat, I don't believe there's any more pro law enforcement member of Congress than me. In the summer of love, as I want to tell your listeners, at the summer of love, the 2020, when police officers and the family were desperate for support, I stood up. Kevin McCarthy tasked our office, stating there's no bad police bills. You're going to be front and center. And I spent 15 months battling the defund and the anti-police rhetoric coming out of our nation's capital. And there was no bad legislation that was signed into law. And it wasn't only me, but we led the charge, and other members of Congress came to the defense of cops. And Pat, I just want to say one thing, and I always say this, and I'm going to get partisan here. Republicans don't need election year polling to stand with law enforcement.
Let me, first let me thank you and your wife both for your servant heart and your service to our country, service to your community. But you're right. There are a handful of people that are in Congress that have a law enforcement background. Talk a little bit about how that is so beneficial in helping. Congress is weighing in on a lot of things having to do with law enforcement without maybe necessarily having a clear understanding of the practical side of some of their work. Tell me how being a law enforcement officer, law enforcement, background in Congress, and how it's helpful in navigating through a sea of all kinds of legislation that's being considered before Congress that affects law enforcement.
Pat, I've been asked that before, and I say 2 things in my life that I'm very fortunate to have done: play hockey and be a law enforcement officer. And if you look at both of those professions, in the game of hockey, it's intense. You're battling You're getting literally browbeat on the ice every game. But your whole goal is to win and to score more goals than the other team. And in Congress, it's the same, to try to get your legislation, a good common sense, pro law enforcement legislation across the finish line while you're getting, attacked verbally by folks that haven't worn the uniform or don't really understand it. And it's really helped me. I've got, as many in law enforcement, we have thick skin because of what we deal with on the streets and what we have dealt with on the streets. And we have to keep our emotions in check and really focus on the end game, which is good, solid legislation, in this case, in support of law enforcement, and making sure we can educate people every single day here on Capitol Hill about law enforcement and making sure they're taken care of. And we talk about their training and making sure that qualified immunity isn't taken away, and making sure for our smaller agencies, the 1033 programs stay in place because they can't afford some of that, the equipment. I served in the third largest police department in the state of Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota. And I was on the tactical team. I had a 223 rifle. It was Vietnam era, and I had a Vietnam era Kevlar helmet. But I knew that somebody needed to do that. Somebody needed to go get that homicide suspect that was holed up. We were not going to allow that homicide suspect to leave and kill other people. He was going to, we were going to capture him to the best of our ability, trying to get nobody injured, including the suspect. And we did that. And Pat, as you know, law enforcement agencies across this country do that. And for me, just that bringing the law enforcement perspective, the hockey perspective into my legislative opportunities and the way I do it. I do believe that bipartisan is the way to go in Washington, and we try to set the example. I've had really, in the summer of love for those 15 months, I had really interesting conversations with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, and they learned from me, and I learned from them too. But the people that just blatantly throw out, anti-law enforcement rhetoric, defund, when they've never worn the shoes, they don't understand that we make a life or death decision. We can go from the force continuum for us can go from officer presence to deadly force in a matter of a second. Yeah, absolutely. And people have to understand that and realize that, and our families are concerned when we leave, for the night shift. And Pat, I said this, last week during Police Week. I said, the greatest sound a spouse or a family member hears from their law enforcement family member that comes home is that Velcro vest. When you take that Velcro vest off and it wakes your spouse up in the morning, in my case, it woke my wife up. But she knew I was home safe. And those are little things that we in law enforcement, we understand. And it's just being able to share that experience in Congress with members. And I think it's really beneficial. And I feel blessed to have had the law enforcement career, survived what I did, and also being able to, bring my professional hockey career, that mentality of just get it done for the right reasons for the American people.
Yeah. I want to talk about two particular bills, but before I do, I want to talk about a crisis, existential crisis we have in law enforcement, one that is not going to be fixed overnight. We're probably looking at a generation to fix it. And that is, during that, you call it summer of love, that 2020, there was so much damage done to our profession that it's not cool to be a law enforcement officer anymore. The problem we have in law enforcement is that the best and brightest are not stepping up at the level that we need to sustain the amount of people that are leaving our profession. So what it's doing is creating a vacuum, and in essence, it's hurting the very communities that, a lot of this, the actions that were taken during this time, claims that we were really trying to help. We've done some really, irreparable harm to our profession. Talk a little bit about some of the things that may be going through Congress right now to help us stabilize law enforcement, recognizing the need to recruit the best and the brightest and to be that next wave of law enforcement, help us define the future of law enforcement.
Well, one of the things you just mentioned, we want the best and the brightest, and I've always
No
said
doubt.
law enforcement, it's honorable, it's a noble profession, and we need the best and the brightest to come forward. And what's happening right now is because of the defund, the anti-police rhetoric that's happening, the morale, retention, and recruitment is down. You go to some of our law enforcement schools, they're down 60, 70%. And what I really think we need to do, it's from every single elected official, not only at the federal level, but the state level and the local level, have to understand we need to get good men and women in this profession. And I will say this, not lowering the standards. Like
Absolutely.
if you're an agency, you got 5 openings and you only have 3 that qualify, do not hire those 2 that are unqualified, because they're going to cause problems, not only for your community, but the profession in general. We don't
Without a
lower
doubt.
our standards. We keep our standards up, and in Congress, we can push legislation like the Protect and Serve Act and my Collective Bargaining Act to make sure that they have a voice in their work hours and their wages and their safety and their family safety. And I think that those are some things that it's every single level, Pat, that we need to make sure that we're supporting law enforcement. And to the viewers listening, I want to say this, that, and I've said it publicly, I want to say this: nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop. You know, we have to also hold ourselves accountable, and those that we see not acting and upholding the oath that they swore to protect, to serve, we have to hold them accountable. And I think that when we do that, we continue to gain trust in the communities that we serve. And I will just say that the incident in Minneapolis involving George Floyd, I'm very sad for all of it, but I'm sad that it happened in my state of Minnesota. When I hold that peace officer's license, police operations and standards and training license, I was proud to hold that, and to have this incident happen in my great state of Minnesota. It was disheartening, and it hurt, and it still hurts, because even in Minnesota, the recruitment is and retention and morale is very low, just like across the country. So we can do our part in Congress, but everybody has to do its part. And like I say, that's why I said moments ago that Republicans don't need election year polling to stand with law enforcement. Every one of my colleagues understands, because I've had the privilege of talking to them. And like I say, I'm not painting my Democratic friends and colleagues on the other side with a broad brush. I'm not doing that at all. There are some colleagues of mine on the other side of the aisle that are just as passionate, but we need all of them on the other side of the aisle, because it only takes a few to try to tarnish the reputation and that good profession that we have. And I would just say that, Pat, if we all can come together on good legislation, allowing benefits for police officers. I mean, there's benefits that we can encourage to go through legislation that will help police officers maybe serving in rural communities more so. Give them opportunities to entice them to serve rural communities, just like the rural doctors and nurses. There's investments to them, and of course, pay. I mean, the pay for law enforcement. I have to tell you, I'm not going to name this. I'm not going to name this agency, but when you work for an agency for 25 years and you get 31% of your pension, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, are you kidding me? They go on thousands of calls for service, never knowing which one is going to, you're going to have to use deadly force, or which one just officer presence is going to take care of. But you can't tell me that when you look in the other private sector, there's places you can work at convenience stores and make almost as much as a police officer. And we need all those jobs, right? We need those good, solid convenience store workers too. But now when we're talking about law enforcement, come on. I mean, that's how you can bring and elevate the professional law enforcement, just like my collective bargaining act, And by the way, I'm proud the negotiations that I held on behalf of my union members that were all unanimously supported, because we upped the pay and upped the benefits, because we believe that we do a good job, and that the city in Duluth in this situation respected our wishes. And like I say, I'm very proud of that department. I would share the successes that we had any member.
Yeah, so you bring it up. Let's go. Let's take it right there. HR 3539, the Public Safety Employer-Employee Cooperation Act. I mean, you talked about your pride of your involvement when you were in police union, but you also served the city council as correct. City council as well. So you served in those positions. Talk about why it's important, not just on a union standpoint, but all the stakeholders to have that what the dialogue that this gives in creating a safer and stronger community through a collective bargaining agreement.
Pat, I've had the privilege of being on the negotiating side as a union president, and also at the city council and county commissioner approving the salaries and the contracts of the men and women. So I've seen it from both sides, and I have to tell you, I've been so appreciative to have the opportunity to be on both sides. I remember in city negotiations, that we were negotiating with the police union. And I got to tell you, it was very interesting to hear some of the comments from the city folks on why they would be asking for this rather than that, et cetera. And I was able to talk them like, here's why, and here's I have the rationale for them wanting this over that, and here's the rationale, and here's why, and it benefited the negotiations, and I think it benefited the city and the police department and the police officers rather, and their families. Yeah. And so I think that when you have somebody that has been on both sides, they're very aware. And I've always said, police officers and their unions never throw what we say spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks for negotiations. When the men and women in our unions are asking for something, it's because it's specifically needed. And we had to, and as elected officials on in the negotiations, we have to understand they're asking that because there's a need, and it's not just a desire to have it. There's a need for what they're asking for, and when you can recognize that, I think if elected officials across this country recognize that, it'll elevate the profession. It'll give them higher pay. It'll allow it to be safer. We used to talk, Pat, early in our careers. We used to say we used to have so many officers per 1,000. That's really not the way to look at it anymore. It's the calls for service and the danger among those service. I mean, can you ask yourself a question? And I did this to OSHA. I said, how many police officers should respond to a domestic call for service? How many is safe? They wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Yeah. Because they knew what I was trying to do.
Well, and there's data to support what you're talking about.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, empirical data. We're going to we're going to dive into that. Look, when it comes to collective bargaining agreements and negotiations, really, if you start with the end in mind, it's easy. The end in mind is we want safe, strong communities. Yeah. Now, let's look at what law enforcement contributes to the safety of that community. And what you're going to find is when you have that open dialogue, the people who work the streets every single day have some really good perspective on how to get there. So you mentioned that, when they're asking for things, it's because there's a need for it. Well, there absolutely is. And I think when we're all focused on what that end result is to have a better community, stronger community, we can accomplish a lot together. In places where you had that adversarial relationship, or you just simply don't want to hear the feedback, it creates tension within agencies. So there's a strong value in having that open dialogue and the ability to be able to talk about those important issues and in a structure that allows you to be able to do so. So I thank you for your introduction of that bill. I think it's important to law enforcement, a very hard one to get everybody to wrap their arms around.
Yeah, and that's a bipartisan piece of legislation, by the way.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
I think that, and I said earlier, when it comes to law enforcement, it should be bipartisan concerns, and that's the goal. As one of the leaders on the Republican side, I want to champion bipartisan legislation that takes care of the officer, their families, and the city they serve.
Yes.
When you have police officers that truly understand that they're respected, I mean, it just transcends to their service on the street. It just does. I mean, right now, Pat, right now, you have police officers that are disgruntled because their current leadership does not support them or their department. You know what they're doing? They're leaving and going to the department 2 hours away that is going to pay more, and they feel very well respected and revered for their service to the community. And we're seeing that in Minnesota. We're seeing major departments in the Twin Cities metro area losing officers, and rural and some other departments that stand up with their law enforcement, their elected leaders stand up with the law enforcement. You're seeing these officers leaving one agency and going to the other because of they like I say, they feel respected and the pay's more. And so and I think that, Pat, you said something moments ago. The safety of the community is paramount. That's our first priority.
That's it.
You talk to the realtors. Any realtor, one of the first two questions are: is it safe in the community, and is there broadband?
Yeah.
Are they connected?
Yeah.
I mean,
and schools. Yep, you're right. That's all. It's all elements to the quality of life. Yeah, I want to change, switch gears a little bit. You mentioned it, the Protect and Serve Act. You and I both had the opportunity with other members of Congress to speak at a press conference about the status of this bill. And it's, as a law enforcement officer, and more personal for you because of your history. In 2019. This bill was passed almost unanimous in the House. It was unanimous in the committee. It went on to the House, and it was lopsided. Like 90% supported this particular bill. And for our viewers and listeners, what this bill does is it opens up an avenue for our law enforcement officers if they're attacked because of their profession. Then it opens up the opportunity for federal charges. It doesn't mean that every case would be a federal charge, but it leaves an avenue for the federal government to step in and say, okay, targeting of law enforcement officers is just simply not acceptable. And here we are. This is 2019. And it passed the House, but it didn't make it through. It didn't become law. So here we are. Every year we're chasing it again. Fraternal Order Police started tracking these numbers. We saw this trend. We tracked it. We worked to get the language in this bill introduced, and we were hopeful in 2019 we'd get somewhere with it. Now, I'm going to tell you what's absolutely not acceptable, and let it fall where it is. And since 2019, we've had some 1,600 officers shot in the line of duty during that period of time, and lost a lot of officers that people who went to work and never came home at the end of their shifts. They and their families deserve better. And probably almost a third of that are ambush attacks of law enforcement officers. Now, if you take this and you apply it to any other profession in the United States, we'd be holding press conferences, we'd put committees together, we'd have hearings, we'd do all of these things, recognizing this is just not acceptable. Somehow, for law enforcement, it's become commonplace. And there are members in Congress that just, I don't understand why we can't get this bill passed. So I appreciate your efforts in introducing it and helping us get some traction with it. It's a travesty what we see is happening in this country. Thank God there are some 800,000 men and women who suit up every day and go into communities knowing that this possibly, but by the grace of God, it could be them.
Yeah, Pat, that's well said. You set it up very well. We have. Right now, the Protect and Serve Act is beneficial in so many ways, but I just want to point out a couple. And I want to go back to the shooting with me where the suspect was a career criminal, shot me in the head. The federal prosecutor out of Minneapolis would not prosecute him for a felon in possession of a handgun. We were beside ourselves. This was in 95.
Yeah.
Our detective bureau pushed, and they just got poo-pooed. Why? This individual is allowed for 12 more years to victimize people. He finally got caught with a bunch of drugs and a bunch of guns, and then went to prison. I mean, he got a slap on the hand for what he did, trying to kill me. And so what this does, this gives the federal prosecutors the ability to say, okay, state or local, if you don't, this is an absolute attack on law enforcement. You better charge that criminal suspect to the greatest extent of the law. If you don't, we'll come in and do it. We'll do your job if you don't do it. And Pat, you talked about the ambushes on law enforcement. It's unbelievable. It's cowardly by these suspects to do this. Hide behind bushes and garages and pick off the cop as he or she is coming into the call for service. And we have to stand up against that. And that's why this act is so important. I mean, we're going to hold them accountable, and we're not going to allow them to get by with a slap on the hand. The federal government will come in if your local prosecutor it takes the easy road. I mean, look at the signal it sends to the criminals. You can take a run at a cop and you're going to slap on a hand. That's unacceptable. Yeah. Unacceptable.
If you're going to target a law enforcement officer, what chance do you think average citizen in your community they have with these same individuals? It's actually an attack on society.
Well said, Pat.
I can't quite reconcile why we would allow this to happen in any profession, much less law enforcement, because it certainly would not be permitted, nor would it be allowed in any other profession.
That's right.
Yeah. So
well said.
So, Representative Stauber, thank you for joining us. If somebody wants to know more about you, what's the best way for them to find out more about you and your office?
Twitter handle at Rep Stauber, Rep Pete Stauber, Rep Pete Stauber. And listen, I just, Pat, as we end up, I want to the men and women in the blue and brown that keep us safe. I want to thank you and your families for your work you do, the profession. You're honorable. Your integrity is through the roof. We support you, and this office stands ready at a moment's notice to help any cop or their family. As a member of the United States Congress, my former profession is I take it seriously, and like I say, my time in uniform may be over, but my watch will never end. Be safe, everyone. Patrick, thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you. And Representative Stauber, thank you, because every law enforcement bill that we have, every issue we've had, you've been a staunch supporter of our profession, and I thank you for what you do every day. And to our viewers and listeners back home, thank you for tuning in to the Blue View podcast, where we talk about the issues that are so vital and important to men and women who suit up and show up every day in communities across this country and make a difference. Thank you.
Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. To get the latest from the National FOP, make sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at GLFOP and on Instagram at FOP National. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.